to send out the order. We got it. Okay. All right. Well, Scott, it's all yours.
All right. Good to see everybody today, this week before Thanksgiving. I appreciate you taking the time to join us in this. So, in this session, we're going to talk a little more intentionally about what an intentional discipleship system looks like. Hopefully, you've had a chance to watch some of the videos ahead of time. That'll help us in our conversations, and hopefully, things are beginning to connect. Hopefully, the practices, we'll talk about those, the system or the grid and how that comes to play. And I've got a worksheet for you. You might have gotten one already to help you to begin to think what this might look like for your congregation. I'm getting an echo from somewhere. Am I the only one hearing an echo? I see people waving. Is that a yes? I'm hearing an echo. Yes, I'm hearing an echo. If you don't mind, just making sure you're on mute, just in case you're the one that's getting us that feedback, that would be helpful for us, just so that we can have a little less distraction there. All right, thanks. So we'll talk about crafting an intentional discipleship system. We'll break into groups and let you hear from each other how you're processing this. What might this look like for your church? And I kind of hope that's where you're at, is what might this look like? I don't expect you at this point to be able to just put this all together. This needs to be a conversation with your church so that it becomes owned and it's everyone's responsibility. And we all understand together how we're moving and growing as disciples. And as we get time towards the end, we'll talk about online tools, what that looks like, which have become much more used because of, well, just have to be because of COVID protocols and whatnot. So we'll talk about some best practices there. And at the end, I'll get you a link to do an evaluation. We appreciate if you'll take some time to do an evaluation. That'll help us as we go forward. And I'll say a little more at the end about some next steps and opportunities for continued conversation with Susan and myself. With that, I want to center us. This is going to come from Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. And let us consider each other carefully for the purpose of sparking love. Other translations say provoking love and good deeds. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you a series of images and pick which image you think goes with the passage. It can be for whatever reason. As you think about provoking one another to love, which of these images helps you connect with the passage? I'm going to read the passage again. So just kind of make a mental note of which image you think connects. I'll show them to you one more time, and then I'll read the passage. So as you hear the word this time, just hold that image in your head. And let us consider each other carefully for the purpose of sparking love and good deeds. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near. So I'll invite you in the chat panel. Which of the images did you choose and why? And as you're doing that, I'll flip through the images, but invite you in the chat panel. Which of the images did you choose and why? How did it help you see the passage in a new way, perhaps? Or help clarify in some ways the passage? I'll say for me, I'll kind of give mine first if you're thinking about that. It's definitely this one for me, just because it's a fun image. And sometimes when others spark us to love or provoke us to love, it can feel a little bit like a punch in the face. And sometimes, that's kind of what I need, is a little bit of a punch in the face. So let's see what y'all had to say. Monty said the two men talking, but because it showed compassion and community. Yeah, that's true, Monty. All but the first one, Sue Lynn said.
I
um,
think the one, the little girl carrying the teddy bear,
okay, why is that?
coming together, because when you're together, at least one of you need to be helped along the way to be carried, whether we're the one carrying or we're the one being carried.
True.
I just think you need that unity.
Yeah, that's true. No, it's very much a benefit of being part of community, right? Is sometimes we need to be carried. That's good. And this is all of them. William said chess. I wonder if anyone would pick the chess. Chess. We always need to be thinking ahead. Okay, good. I like that. Brenda said the two girls on the phone. Yeah, they look encouraging to each other, right? With a little less violence than the first one. It says all of them, and Richard says the two young ladies on the phone because it shows connection and encouragement. Yeah, and who doesn't need some connection and encouragement these days? You may have seen the article going around yesterday. It said 38% of pastors were thinking of quitting. And as I talk with pastors from around the connection, I'm surprised it's not higher. A lot of stress, a lot of stress with budgets and with COVID and with partisanship. And so I want to take a moment and just say thank you for what you're doing. That you in your ministry are provoking others in love. Don says, "How do they talk selfies with those? Yeah, how do they take selfies with those? Yeah, that's a good one, right? Yeah, they probably wondered what those phones were. Yeah. Before we go forward, I want to have a moment of prayer. Let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for who you are. We give you thanks that you are with us in the most trying of times. Lord, I pray for encouragement. I pray that you would help all our churches to be a witness to their community of what it looks like to provoke one another to acts of love as they meet together, as they worship together. Help them to be the people of God you are calling them to be. We pray this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And all God's children said, Amen.
Amen.
So real quick overview, where we're at, where we're going here. You've seen me show this a few times, this visual. The hope is that not just that we create an intentional discipleship pathway or chart or system, but that we develop a culture of discipleship. And then from that culture of discipleship, we have a path or a system for people to use and to grow and to know their next steps in growing as a disciple. And then we have the ministries, events, programs that help them to do that, to live into that. And so we've talked about how every aspect of our church needs to rediscover their why and understand how it connects to making disciples. So it'll be true for our church councils, our SPR trustees, all our committees, in worship. All that should fit together in helping us to be disciples. And again, I've used this before. It's worth showing again. Healthy people develop healthy congregations. Healthy congregations develop healthy people. As we were starting, before we started, I guess, Kathy and myself and Susan were having a conversation about grief and how our church is going through grief, right? And grieving people that we together, when we acknowledge our grief, we can grow together, right? And so as we think about trying to help us to become more intentional about discipleship, healthier Christians, part of that is learning how to deal with grief and going through that together. So if you've had a chance to watch the videos, I talked about this in terms of spiritual practices and what they do for us and how these connect with developing an intentional discipleship system. Is that these practices help us to hear God, they help position us to receive God's grace, right? As we know, the Christian life is by grace. And when we receive God's grace is when we grow and we put ourselves in position when we are doing spiritual practices, whether that's in worship, whether that's through acts of generosity, acts of compassion, in small groups, and provoking one another to love. All those things work towards helping us to be a disciple. And then an intentional discipleship system puts that in sort of a method or a plan to do that. I mean, we can be reminded of the way the early Methodists did this in terms of class meetings and bands and societies. There was a method, there was a system as they grew deeper and deeper as disciples. So as we begin thinking about what our intentional discipleship system will look like, we begin to think about what practices we're going to focus on. And it's not something you roll out all at once. Sometimes you sort of phase into it, right? You might pick one or two of these areas to really focus on during a year to help people really begin to understand how these practices help grow them as disciples and help them to begin to learn to practice them in what it looks like for them in their life. And so we'll talk more about this as we go on today. The basic elements of an intentional discipleship system is that we have a definition, right? A definition that helps us to know what it looks like to live into a disciple. What are the characteristics of a disciple? What is it that they do? And then the stages of growth. How can we kind of see some mile markers, some milestones that help us to know that we're growing in faith? A healthy intentional discipleship system focuses on relationships. Oftentimes when I help churches do this, it ends up being very curriculum heavy, right? Take this class, and then you take this class, and you take this class. Certainly classes, small, short-term classes, long-term classes are a part of it, but it ought to focus on relationships and experience as well, right? How do retreats fit into this? How does mission opportunities fit into this? It should be relational and experiential. In our book, Developing an Intentional Discipleship System, it has this grid. This is from the work of Phil Maynard, adapted from his work. And you can see up on the top the stages of growth. You can see on the side here the characteristics and habits. And then it's got some description to help people learn how to move through this. This is one. There are several. We have examples of those. I'm going to flip down a little bit on our website, and I can give you that link to help give you some models, some examples of what this might look like. This middle one here is where I go to church. Welcome, offer, respond, and seek. Interestingly, for a while, their small groups were called offer groups because offering Christ, it fit in this area. Now, offer groups is just kind of a weird language, and it didn't, people were sort of like, what happens in an offer group? And so they ended up changing the language just to small groups because that makes more sense, a little more descriptive. But you can see they were intentional about where those fit. This faith growth pathway, this comes out of Michigan, planting, nurturing, shaping, and sharing. And they had a whole brochure that had different activities that fit underneath these big buckets, if you will. And the same is true, I'm not going to pronounce this one because I would pronounce it wrong, as people sort of move their way up the summit of the mountain to help them think through how to take intentional steps as growing as disciples. So this is just a blank version of what you saw before, so that you can begin to think, what might this look like for us? And I'll put in the chat panel again, and I think you may have received it as an attachment as well. But I put together a worksheet, and here's try that again. Well, it's not let me do that. Try one more time. Well, you're just being difficult. All right, give me 1 second and I'll share this with you. All right, it's there now in the chat. This is a worksheet that I've put together just to help churches begin to think through with some specific steps just basically a white document just to help brainstorm, begin crafting, begin designing. What might this look like for us? What's our definition of discipleship going to be? What are our characteristics? What are the stages of growth? If you've got a metaphor, like you saw the agricultural metaphor with this one, or the mountain metaphor, whatever that looks like for you. And I've got several templates that you can use to begin to working on what does this look like. I mean, I think in order to do this well, what you would do is you'd get a group of a team, a task force of 4 or 5 people, committed lay folks in your church, and get their input and get them to help craft what this should look like. So ideally, this is like a 3-4 month long process of conversation, of dialogue with key leaders in the church. What does this look like for us? How can this be helpful for those in our church so that they know the next steps they can take in terms of discipleship? The other part that I find helpful, and I'll show you one that's in that document, is this one, right? The definition here would just be know God, love God, and serve God. This is a pretty simplistic version of what this might look like in a pretty small church. And so, help them to identify where they're at and where they're going. I was going somewhere else with that and lost my train of thought. Oh, I know where I was going. So one of the other ways this is helpful as we begin to craft this, begin to put this together, is it can be an assessment tool as well. For example, if you're putting your ministries down, here's the different activities we have, and you might find that, we've got a lot of activity for those who are committed, those who are members, but we don't have a lot for those who are cautious or curious about the faith, or we don't have a lot for those who are maturing, right? And so this also can work as an assessment tool to figure out what are some areas as a church we need to grow into? What are some other activities we need to be offering to help those in our community to take their next steps in faith? All right, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, get some tea. I also want to just ask your questions. All right, as you've seen the videos, hopefully done some reading, what questions are coming for you at this point in the journey? I'm going to give you some chances to talk with each other in a minute, but before we get there, what questions, what's not clear, what needs more explanation? Tell me where you're at, or just general feedback. I'll take whatever you got.
Scott, as I was watching the videos last night, I've served in smaller churches. I've got a church now, probably 40 people on a Sunday. And, as I look at all the array and looking at this chart we're just looking at, it's like, okay, I need to do something for all these boxes. And I think about my congregation, and I may have one person here and 2 people there and 1 person here, and the thought can be overwhelming. How do I do something that is targeted to each of those needs? But what I find myself generally doing is trying to do bigger picture things that try to touch as many different boxes as possible, because I can't do 20 things a week, but maybe I can do 2 things a week. I think that's the struggle I have, is I'm trying to digest some of this information and think about how it applies to my context.
Yeah, that's a great question, Monty. Appreciate you asking that, right? And this is exactly why, well, a few quick thoughts. One is, this is why I would get a team together, right, to help you begin to brainstorm, because they may have some ideas about what's needed that you may not see, or what some people need. And as Methodists, what we tend to try and do is we tend to try to get everybody, right? Well, and sometimes that's good. Sometimes that works against us as well. And so perhaps the question may be, what particular area do we want to focus on for the next 4 or 5 months? As opposed to trying to get everybody, focus more on what's the biggest need right now? Like right now, where are most people at? And how do I get most people to take the next step? because part of the hope as people move through this chart is that they then become leaders. So like the professing folks in this case, they're the ones helping to minister to the curious and cautious folks, right? So that in my mind, I'm a little bit less linear than what this chart shows. It's probably more of a spiral image for me, or a helix, if you're familiar with that imagery, right? So that as you're moving some people forward, they then become the leaders backwards, if that makes a little bit of sense. So how can you help focus those who you have to take a step, right? And I don't know if that's helpful or not, but in terms of instead of thinking about everybody, how do I take the motivated, where are the motivated at, and how do I help them take the next step? Is that somewhat helpful, Monty?
Yeah, that's a helpful thought.
It's a good question. Linda's saying she can't download the full document. Is that the worksheet, Linda? I see her trying to unmute.
Yeah. Are you trying? I was trying to resend it to her.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Huh. Is anyone else having that problem? I can always email you later and give you a Word document if the Google Doc isn't working.
yeah,
So I can do that later.
I've got it in Word. So as soon as I can get that up, I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thanks. All right, good. That was a good question from Monty. Any other questions along those lines? Anything that's still not clear? Anything that you need some help with?
I just want to say, this is Sue Lynn, it really started the wheels turning in my head about where we are in my church and where we are not.
Mm.
Do
Can you
we
say a little
really,
more?
do we really know our why anymore?
Oh.
Or are we just doing?
Hmm. Good. I appreciate you sharing that, Sue Lynn. I mean, that's part of it, right? It is very much it works as an assessment tool as well, right? To begin to think, why are we doing these programs, right? Kathy and I were talking before about how before COVID, they had these great choirs, and a lot of people just want to get back to that. Well, perhaps God's doing a new thing now, and we need to go in a different direction. And and doing that well means helping people to grieve what was, like celebrating God worked through this particular ministry, this particular activity, but God's calling us in a different direction now. Let's follow Him. So helping people to grieve what was, so that they can begin to move more fully into a new place. Yeah, thanks, Sulan. And then that's the hope, right? Is that you begin to get your wheels spinning, all right? And that's kind of where process-wise you probably should be at. Is wheels are spinning, making some connections, seeing some things perhaps you hadn't seen before. That's kind of where I would hope you're at. Yeah, thanks, Sue Lynn. Anybody else? Any other questions before we break into small groups?
I have one, Scott.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Right now with COVID the way it is, my church is only having Sunday service. We've tried to do get back to Sunday school or Bible study. And each time I mention it, they get afraid because most of mine are older people. And right now it's a little overwhelming to try to overcome that. Mm-hmm. And, think about doing a small group or, a Bible study and get them to where they feel safe. It's been a struggle since the pandemic started. And it's like you take 3 steps forward and then you get slid back because somebody in the neighborhood's got COVID. So it's been a tough battle.
For sure, Don. And I hear that a lot. And I guess what I would say to that is have compassion on yourself. Have compassion on where you're at and what you're able to do right now. Right, that perhaps now more is a strategy time more than a do time, right? Like what, get some people together to begin to think, what might this look like in the future, as opposed to what does this look like next week?
Yes. Well, I liked your video talking about your doing online stuff. Right now, I'm only able to do Facebook. I do Facebook on Sunday morning service, and then I started a daily devotion, which I've had a lot of feedback on. And I liked a lot of your ideas about working in stewardship and different things. I like some of the ideas about, lighting a candle, kind of making them feel more like they're in service. And I thought about it. I wrote down some notes on those. Even have someone watch the screen while I'm doing it to see who's in the Zoom meeting, sort of. Usually their names pop up that they're watching, where you can mention them.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's worked out well for me because I haven't been able to do anything.
Yeah, that's good. I appreciate you sharing that, Donnie. And just to help pick up on that when we get to, think in terms of engagement, right? So just like in worship, we want people engaged mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Engagement may look like, in-person setting may look like taking communion, singing, etc. How do we think about engagement when it comes to participating online so that it's not just simply a passive experience? Right, I'm going to put the worship up and watch. How do we invite engagement? And one of the ways you mentioned, Donnie, is just to through chats, through other things to help engage, call people's names, to help that engagement can go a long way in transforming when it comes to online platforms, how to do that well. Especially when social media first started, that was the thing, was churches tended to use it as another place to throw announcements. Right, hey, we're doing this, I'll put it on Facebook. And what I try to help push churches towards is engagement. How do I get engagement online and not just throwing more announcements online, right? So that it becomes more of a conversation as opposed to just throwing information out there. I hope that's helpful. We can talk. We'll hopefully talk a little more about that towards the end in terms of online ways to do that well. And you've named some of them already, and hopefully, because it's a reality that's here. It's a reality that people have been forced into. I may have said before, I did my doctorate of ministry project in using online and digital tools for small groups, and I did that back in 2014, and kind of put it on the shelf because churches just weren't interested. And then 2020 hit, and everyone was like, how do I do this? It's like, well, hey, I think I may have something to add here, actually. And now we're forced into it. And so how do we do this well? And thinking in terms of engagement is one way to do that. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to break y'all into groups. And what I want you to do, okay, so Linda's asking, is it too much to do this in a sermon series? That's a good question, Linda. I would say one, I would not think in terms of a sermon series. You might think in terms of multiple sermon series. And also, you might also think about spreading this out, like do a sermon series, wait a couple of months, do another sermon series that's slightly different, wait a couple of months and do it at another time, right? So for example, you could do 4 weeks on worship, right? Go back to lectionary for, Advent or what have you, and then come back and talk about small groups and the role of community. Do a few weeks on that. Go back to the lectionary for Easter, and then come back with generosity and stewardship, right? So that it becomes a part of the culture, right? So think long term and not just one sermon or one sermon series. Is that helpful, Linda? Okay, so I see your head nodding, so I'm going to take that as a yes. So I have put in the chat panel the discussion, and what I want you to do in your small groups, you'll be in a certain number. Let me share my screen so I can show you, as this is this is what it will look like when you get there. Introduce yourselves, do any short introductions, and your questions are going to be what characteristics of discipleship will you focus on? That can be for your intentional discipleship system. It can also just be, for the next 6 months, we're going to focus on this one or these. And what stages of growth, as you begin to think about what your intentional discipleship system will look like, what stages of growth will you likely focus on? I've put some examples that I mentioned. I put them just to refresh your memory. And then when you can find your group, whatever group number you're in, and somebody can volunteer, just take a couple of notes in terms of what you're thinking, what characteristics you may focus on, what stages of growth you're going to focus on. Does that make sense? We'll do this for about 15 minutes or so in your groups. You stop sharing screen. All right. What I'm going to do now is break you into groups of about 3 or so. And I'm going to open the rooms, and you should see a message inviting you to the room. And I'll hop from room to room. So if you've got questions for me, I'll certainly be around to do that. Well, I hope I didn't cut you off in the middle of a really good conversation. I heard several good conversations as I went from room to room. I appreciate your engagement there. I'll highlight a few quick things, and then we're going to take a break. I heard a number of folks talk about identifying the big picture and the why first. I think that's really important. Something that Richard said was that this cannot be implemented upon people. Right? People can smell a program and they'll revolt pretty quickly, right? But this is something that you create with, and it's a living document that should change over time, right? It's not just something you do one time, put it up on a wall, and that's it. It should be constantly in conversations, a living document. Other things that I heard that were good. What are we doing that we don't need to do anymore? I know one of the things that, looking for someone. Don't see him. No, it wasn't Monty. It may have been Monty, who was talking about, reframing the current time as an opportunity, right? That instead of just seeing what we're not doing, but, the current reality is a new opportunity. I'm not going to say that Monty called people old dead leaves in his group. That may have happened. Actually, it wasn't him. It may have been someone else in that group that I won't name. But yeah, those are ways of helping to reframe what God is doing now, right? As opposed to the nostalgia of what God was doing, how to reframe and go forward. And as I said with a few people, that we are not selling a quick fix here, right? This is a long-term strategy of helping to create something that's helpful for our parishioners and newcomers, to help them know what next steps they can take, what opportunities they have to take in growing in their faith. All right, it is 2:54 your time. Let's take a break. You can turn off video if you need to. Right at the top of the hour, we'll come back. I've got a video to show you. We'll talk about that and then break into groups one more time. So got about 5 minutes or so. And by 5 minutes, I don't mean 10, I mean 5 minutes. I'm also going to put in the chat panel one of the other resources we were talking about in one of the groups is this book, Job Descriptions and Leadership Training, if you ever need to use that. We're in the process of revising this to make it more in line with intentional discipleship systems, but still can be helpful for folks. So that's there. Another resource you may want to look at on the upper room site is the Soul Reset that our previous General Secretary, before his passing, Junius Dotson, wrote about. Breakdown, breakthrough, and the journey towards wholeness. Maybe something that's helpful for you. So that's there as well. Give folks just another minute, and then I'm going to share my screen and show a video. see Susan's still away. Well, looks like most everybody is back. So I'm going to share my screen. This video is called Sarah. Is anyone curious? Has anyone seen this video before? Just kind of raise your hand if you've seen it before. Don't see anyone saying yes. So this is called Sarah. I'm going to start it in just a second. If you cannot hear it, let me know. I'm not going to give you any preface to it. I'll just let you watch it and we'll debrief afterwards.
Keep telling me this place sucks the life out of you. I mean, this is life. Dreams. Just somebody talking. Anyway, you don't need to conform. You're way too talented for that. Here's some advice. Be unique by not going out there and getting hurt. You do that, you'll be all right. It's not worth it. You're just going to end up here anyway.
You two get in here.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I can make night manager, right?
What's going on with you today, man? You haven't said a word. A single word.
I think I'll skip class this week. Head up north.
Are you serious? Thought you actually wanted to graduate college. I mean, keep this up, man.
Not worried.
Anywhere's fine.
Well, bright side is, I mean, look around. You can always work at a place like this.
Never.
All right. Free refills on the coffee, right? Plus, they always got great coffee at a place like this.
As much as you'd like at a place like this.
See?
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
What can I get you?
I'll have a cup of that great coffee.
Okay.
Does that bother you?
Oh, nah. I'm immune. My dreams of going to college died long ago.
Are you sure about that?
Yes.
You know what I just realized? Aren't you on a scholarship? Yeah. You're gonna ruin that scholarship, man. Keep this up.
anytime you're ready. No rush.
I appreciate it. You have a great day.
Same as every day.
Then you have a great tomorrow.
Tomorrow's tomorrow.
No, tomorrow's your choice.
Hey.
Here's the church. Here's the steeple. Open the doors and see all the people.
Discipleship begins with relationship. Get started at seeallthepeople.org.
All right. So what did you see?
Hopelessness turned to hope.
Good. Thanks, Lynn. Others? What did you see?
Relationship turning to confidence.
Okay, good. What else you see?
Someone struggling to find themselves.
Okay. Somebody else?
Someone needing encouragement.
Okay.
I saw the power of being present.
Say more, Manny.
We blow through life sometimes and we're not paying attention to what's going on around us, to be present to other people, to be aware of situations, to see every person that we encounter as somebody that has some unique thing that's going on in their life that we might could help or hurt, depending on the way that we either pay attention to them or ignore them.
Yeah, well said, Monty. So one of my colleagues, David Teal, Director of Laity and Leadership, he says the secret to life is paying attention. And I think that's what we saw, right, with the man, is he paid attention. And the connection I want to make is when it comes to an intentional discipleship system, to me, this is the kind of people we're trying to make, form, shape, mold, are those who are paying attention. Those who are disciples see other people's pains, hurts, and invites them into relationship, gives them encouragement, and invites them into relationship with them, and also into the church. And the church can help surround them, love them, and grow them. Does that make a little bit of sense? I mean, I think that to me is what every time I watch this video, is to me, that's what we're hoping to create, are the people who can pay attention, who can see other people's needs and hurts and wants. All right, so instead of asking this question, oops, I went too far. I'm going to do a bit of an audible and jump back up to talk about online resources and ways we can engage people online. And one of the things that I've tried to model is the flipped classroom, right? A traditional classroom being you go to class, you hear a lecture, you go home and you do homework, right? My kid experienced it. My younger son experiences this, every day, goes to school, comes home, homework. The flipped classroom is you're switching where those things are happening. You're watching the lecture, listening to the lecture, and then you're coming to class and doing activities. So for example, the way we've done this, right, is you've watched videos, done some reading, we come here and we discuss, right? There's ways you can do this pretty easily in church settings, because my guess is most of you have a smartphone. And just with this device, you can do a lot of things. For example, with the voice memos, right? Was it Monty or somebody? Maybe it was Donnie talking about doing devotionals for the church. One way you can do that is with your phone. The voice memos is record yourself for 3 or 4 minutes and email that out, right? Really easy to do. And you can do this in a number of different ways. I'll kind of make up some examples on the fly. So let's say you're preaching about stewardship this week, right? And on Monday, you do a voicemail of like 3 minutes long. Hey, this coming Sunday, the passage is going to be this particular passage. We're going to be talking about stewardship. And I'm curious, what are the ways you've seen this done well? What are ways you've seen people who are generous and what impact they've made on your life and others? You just ask some questions, put that in a voicemail, and email that to everybody. So that through the week, they're thinking about what's coming. Or you can do it in reverse, Monday morning or even Sunday evening. Hey, in service today, we talked about stewardship. I'm curious what you're thinking about that, blah, blah, blah. And you email that out so that people are thinking about what you said on Sunday through the week, right? That's one of a zillion different ways you can use your phone to help engage people, to help people begin to be mindful of what they're doing. Other ways you can do this in small groups, right? As opposed to Sunday school classes are notorious for coming together, listening to a lecture and having a little bit of dialogue, right? What if there was something they watched on their own time during the week so that when they got to class, they can jump right into engagement, right into conversation, and not just having to spend that time listening to a lecture. So that more time is spent maximizing that space, which is conversation, right? Other ways you can do this would be to invite families to do activities during the week that then they bring to worship on Sunday, or have them to record themselves or take pictures of themselves doing an activity that then is shown in worship. So you're connecting what's happening in worship with what they're doing as families. I'm giving some samples just to hopefully begin to get you brainstorming of ways you can use tools that you already have, doesn't cost anything, that can help in terms of engagement, right? And that's, to me, that's the benefit of social media, right? Is it should be social. It helps to drive that way. Does that make a little bit of sense? I see some heads nodding. That's good. Other things to think about. Let's just say you're doing an online small group. Think like you're doing something in person in terms of hospitality, in terms of your preparation. You notice, like with the video, I said it's like, hey, make sure you can hear the sound. Include times for silence. Breakout groups. You see me do that, and I do that with no more than 3 or 4 in a group. Once it gets past 4, in my experience, it gets a little more clunky, people talking over one another, etc. Now, I do this when I teach in person. I'll say, turn to your neighbor and talk about this, or 3 or 4 people kind of turn your chairs toward each other and talk about this. And when I do this online, I'm just more mindful to keep those even smaller. So think like you are in person. One other thing there is, if you can, have someone dedicated for technology. Let's say, I'm gonna pick on Monty because he's the square next to me there and he's got such a great haircut, is if Monty is leading a small group, I'll pick on Alta because she's to my other side. Alta is the one who's managing the technology. So if people have questions, they would ask Alta so that Monty can focus on what he's doing, right? The other thing I will say is, let's say we're doing a 4-week course on the book of Romans, we're doing it online. Take one class and just meet together online and don't worry about the lesson. Just get used to the technology. Help people find where their mute button is. Help people get used to breaking into groups and coming back, right? Just get people used to the technologies so that the platform begins to bleed into the background and isn't the focus, right? When it becomes the focus, everything is clunkier and takes longer. But if you can help that go into the background, the more people can focus on the conversation. Other things to do to encourage participation is use polls. Zoom has polls. You can use other tools like Mentimeter for polls. Sharing times, right? Have people go find something in their house, do show and tell. Eliminate distractions. That's just a way of saying, hey, if you don't mind muting yourself, or hey, if you don't mind, move your camera so that I can see your face and your mouth. Share screens, right? You can do all sorts of things to help in terms of engagement, right? All right, that's enough of me talking about that. Questions? I saw there was some chat. Let me open that up. Storytelling. Yep, that's a good one, Gary. One of the things I've heard churches do, this was back when the pandemic was more enforced than what it is now, is they would have the grandparents of the congregation have a Zoom time in the middle of the afternoon and read a story. And small children from the church would show up in that Zoom and they would listen, and that gave the parent a chance to go to the bathroom or fix a meal or do whatever. And they were learning someone else's name in the congregation as well. So that's one way to do that. Laura said story was someone seeing her as a person. And oh, thanks, Laura. That was back to the video. Yeah, that's very, very true, Laura. Sorry, I missed that earlier. All right. So let me pause there. Questions in terms of online engagement. I mean, my focus tends to be in terms of faith formation online more than worship online. I certainly have thoughts about that sort of stuff if you want to ask. But any thoughts, questions, comments about using online platforms for faith formation or engagement?
What's some helpful hints when it's hybrid? We're getting ready to do kind of an Advent study with sort of both some in and some online.
Yeah, that's a good question, Laura, and really tough. Yeah, some best practices there is just make sure if they're, let's say we're the online and there's an in-person group, make sure if we're on a laptop or a TV or something, we're well seen and people are looking at us too, and not just looking at the people in the group. Because once that happens, it just becomes an in-person conversation, and the people online tend to drift and almost as though they're not part of it. And when they don't feel part of it, they'll find something to do, right? If you're like me, there's 1,000 things to do in your house, right? Dishes, laundry. It's easy to find those things to do. So the more you can make sure you're engaging those online so they don't feel secondary would be a big part of that. Yeah, good question, Laura.
I had a thought today about children's ministry, and when you talked about Zoom time with grandparents, it made me think of that again. Sunday school for children has become a real issue. Children aren't coming, so it's hard to know how to plan. And as I was reading today or last night, I thought, well, why couldn't we set up a Zoom meeting with the children and their parents? It's hard for them to come sometimes because of schedules, but if they're at home, maybe 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes together just to say hello and read a Bible story. It's getting close to Christmas, do an Advent activity. But that was kind of an aha for me, to engage the children and not lose them.
Yeah, that's a really good thought, Sue-Lin, and some things to just to be aware of, right? And I don't think we're quite in the place we used to be. There was a lot of Zoom fatigue, like because kids were going to school on Zoom. Now there's less of that. There's more in person, and so their willingness. And so one of the things you may do with that is have them do an activity, and then when they come online to share the activity. So they've done that together, but then when they come online, they're just sharing with other folks what they're doing. So it's more of a sharing time and less of a sit back and listen time, because the hope is it's engaging and not passive. The more passive it is, the more likely we are to check our phone or do something else. But I think that's an excellent idea, Sue-Lin. I think you're thinking the right sort of thoughts and asking the right sort of questions because schedules have gotten so busy. One other quick thought with that is, how do you help them do something like that and then share that in worship as well? Right? And you can just simply say, hey, we met, we did this. If you've got a way to show a picture of it, it can be a great way to sort of lift that up as something that's happening. Linda saying, if it's like my grandchildren, they want to jump around, do actions and showing themselves, how do we get their attention? Yeah, that's a really good question, Linda. And that's why I would emphasize the sharing part of it and not the passive. Make sure they're engaging and not just sit back and if they sit back and watch, yeah, you're going to get that. The more you can get them to engage, the less that'll be an issue. I'm not going to say it's going to go away. I've got nieces and nephews of little kids, so I get that when we FaceTime. Yeah. Several children's leaders have incorporated games into their time together so they can keep their attention. Yeah, games are fun. I've done that with my own small group. We did Boggle. If you're familiar with Boggle, I would take a picture of the Boggle thing, share that to my laptop and share my screen and say go, and we played Boggle together. And that was sort of at the heart of the pandemic and as a way when we couldn't get together in person, just to be in community, right? Sometimes, especially during that time, what I was advising was more than a study, people just need relationship and a place to belong. And that's true still today. People just need a place to belong. So helping to do that and maximize that when they need to. That's good, Susan. Got time for one or two more questions if you have them.
I have a question, Scott.
Yeah, Gary.
When I think about being engaged on social media, I know that the rules and the algorithms which are dictating social media are really affecting our society, affecting the way people think, yep, the way we cloister ourselves into echo chambers, and to be successful on social media, you kind of have to play by those rules. Yep. And shape your message to be a part of that. And is there a way that I'm struggling as a person who does some of that on our church of like, am I just feeding this monster and hoping I get a little bit of benefit from it for our church? We get a little publicity, even though I know overall this is just making things worse and not any better. And so I struggle with, is there a net gain? Even if we get a few more people to watch some video or engage with some post, is the net gain really worth it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary, with lots of different tangents to go down. I think that is a question we have to ask ourselves in terms of how does this fit into our discipleship efforts? And let me put on my pessimist hat. I'm not real optimistic when it comes to the current state of social media, especially as you said, Gary, in terms of algorithms, because I feel like what's driving the algorithm is outrage more than true engagement. So if you're having success getting people to go from social media engagement into the church community, whether online or in person, great. If you're not, I don't know that I wouldn't say it may not be worth your time, and it may not. I guess is kind of where I fall with that. That's a good question because, yeah, the algorithms are real problems right now, for sure. I don't know if that answers your question completely, but it's something we do need to be mindful of in terms of social media and the algorithms that are attempting to keep us engaged through outrage and anger and not through community, right? Because I want to be in genuine community. There's a very shortened version of a much longer rant I could give. Martha, were you going to ask something?
Well, I'm sort of halfway listening to some of that. I was listening to all of it, sort of halfway processing everything else.
Sure.
One thing we've done, and we have not quite done it really well yet, is we have what we call our Billboard Facebook page, which is public, everybody sees it. And we created a First Farragut Church online group. And what we intended for that, it's a closed group, it's a private group. You have to ask to be a member. And so it's within that group that we actually, I post occasionally some, what's coming up on Sunday. We've had a few people post some prayer concerns. But another thing that we did this a year ago, I think, was a prayer study. And the video is through the Facebook group. And then it also sets up a separate group where that study lives there forever. Okay. We learned that in some sort of webinar we did last year. It all runs together, but we haven't fully developed that. But what it does is it cuts out, it's not just general in the algorithm. Your people have to want to be in that group and go to that group for resources. It requires them to be a member of that group, but people that are the ones who want to be there.
Yeah, and it also lifts up the dynamic of confidentiality.
Right? Yeah, we have a set of rules. We had somebody who asked to be a member of the group the other day that was super sketchy. We said no.
And you have to do that, right? Like we want to be inclusive, we want to be all this, but at the same time, in order for true community to happen, there has to be boundaries.
Right.
Right. Yeah, that's true. All right, so let me wrap up. We got just a few minutes left. So I'm putting in the chat panel an evaluation. You'll probably get this again later in an email, follow-up email, but I really appreciate it if you took the time to fill that out. Let me share my screen again. So where we're at in terms of this is you've begun to get some of the initial tools and resources to help you think about what this might look like. Right. And as I said before, it'll probably take you, if you want to do this well and have a team, it's going to take you months to live into this just to get a first version of what this would look like for you. So one of the things Susan and I have talked about is doing an office hour type of thing next month, or maybe even January, as you begin to process this, what this might look like in your church, to have some coaching, if you will, some further time to reflect and ask questions as you begin to put this to work in your church. So Susan will be getting you more information about that. Well, I'll also be inviting just a handful of folks to be part of a focus group to help us do some pre-targeted feedback about how helpful this was, what wasn't helpful, so that as we do this again in other places, we've gotten your feedback on that. So if you see that's coming, that's something you'd be willing to do, I would appreciate it. Susan, am I missing anything else? Am I forgetting anything? I will also put in the chat panel this as well. We have several online courses, teachable courses, free and CEU versions. If those are helpful to you, feel free to take advantage of those. We have new ones coming out pretty much like every other month or so. So those can be helpful to you on a variety of topics.
We will be sending out the video of this. It may hit your inbox after Thanksgiving, just based on where our staffing is at the conference office and my getting everything uploaded and to you. So if you don't get it next week, no, or by tomorrow, you'll get it after Thanksgiving. So just a FYI on that. The office hours, we're looking at Thursday, December the 2nd at the same time that we have here at 2 o'clock or 7 o'clock that Thursday. And that's just an opportunity for folks to come online and ask Scott and I questions. So we'll be talking further about the focus groups in that email with the recording. and how you can sign up for that, as well as any other resources, just knowing that Scott and I are available to help you as you work through this process. And to meet, I'm available to meet with your leadership team on a one-to-one basis, or in person, or by Zoom. So work those out.
And lastly, I would just say thank you for taking your time to be a part of this. I do hope it's been helpful to you. If nothing else, just in terms of thinking a little bit, further away, a little bit of distance, giving you some brainstorming, some ideas, and how you can be more intentional about discipleship and activities that you offer to help further that.
Scott, we greatly appreciate your leadership, and thank you over the last three months to help us begin to think about what our system looks like and how we move forward as we continue to move through this pandemic and post-pandemic. So thank you.
For sure. Well, I hope this is just the beginning part of a longer relationship.
Right. And thank you to each one of you for your participation. Appreciate it.
Well, I'll offer us a closing prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks. We give you thanks for who you are, especially during this season of Thanksgiving. Help us to have the eyes of faith to see all the different blessings you have bestowed upon us. As we move into the time of Advent, help us to take on that posture of waiting for you to come and envelop us again and show yourself to us, that we might see again your glory. Lord, I pray for all these pastors and leaders. I ask that you would continue to give them visions and dreams of where it is you're guiding them and their church and their community. Help them to see your presence. Help them to discern where you're leading. Help them to be a model of discipleship, that others might come and experience the abundance that's found in you. We pray this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thanks all.